Before we talk about who said what, before we talk about interviews, memoirs, palace briefings, betrayal, forgiveness, or family drama, just look at the picture. Two brothers, same father, same mother, same palace childhood, same cameras outside the gates. But today, one of them moves through Britain as the future king, surrounded by status, security, inheritance, and the quiet assumption that the system will always make room for him. And the other one has to ask whether it is safe to bring his wife and children back to the country he was born in. That is the real split. Not the headlines, not the gossip, not the shouting matches between royal commentators who decided years ago which brother they were going to defend. The real split is this. Prince William stands inside the structure. Prince Harry stands outside it. And once you see that, the whole story changes. Because this is not just about two brothers who stopped speaking. This is about what happens when one son inherits the machine, and the other son has to survive after leaving it. And the numbers make that painfully clear. You can call it royal drama if you want. You can call it a family feud. You can say Harry complains too much, or William is too cold, or the whole thing is exhausting. But behind all of that noise, there is a much colder reality. William is now connected to one of the most powerful inherited financial structures in Britain, the Duchy of Cornwall. A vast estate passed automatically to the heir to the throne. Land, property, income, influence, and a position that does not come from building a company, winning an election, or proving anything to anyone. It comes from birth. And Harry? Harry left the working royal system and lost the protection that came with it. He lost public funding. He lost the official security arrangement he once had. He went to court over protection in the United Kingdom, and he lost. He has said he does not feel safe bringing Meghan and their children back without proper official protection. So when people reduce this to, Harry wants money, they are missing the point. This is not a story about greed. It is a story about belonging. Because in the royal family, money is never just money. Security is never just security. A house is never just a house. A seat in the royal box is never just a seat. Every privilege says something. Every protection says something. Every closed door says something. And what this split says is brutal. One brother is treated as the future of the institution, and the other is treated as a former member who should be grateful for whatever access he is still allowed. That is why the contrast matters. Imagine William at Wimbledon, the royal box, the cameras, the polite applause, the controlled smiles, the visible ease of someone who belongs exactly where he is sitting. Nobody watching that scene has to wonder whether he is protected. Nobody has to wonder whether the state recognizes his importance. Nobody has to wonder whether his children, his wife, his movements, his public appearances are part of a protected royal ecosystem. The answer is already built into the image. Then imagine Harry trying to plan a trip to the United Kingdom with his family. Not as a tourist. Not as a celebrity passing through London for attention, but as the son of the king. As a man whose father's health has already been a public concern. As a father himself, asking whether his children can safely visit the country where their grandfather is king. And suddenly the question is not, why is Harry still complaining? The question is, how did two sons of the same king end up in two completely different worlds? Because that is the part people keep trying to soften. William and Harry did not simply grow apart. They were assigned different meanings from the beginning. William was not just the older brother. He was the heir, the future, the one the institution had to protect, because one day he would become the institution. Every choice around him was shaped by that fact. His education, his image, his privacy, his mistakes, his marriage, his children, his public role. All of it was filtered through one quiet assumption: this boy must be preserved. Harry was loved, yes. He was famous, yes. He was protected for much of his life, yes. But he was also the spare. And that word is not just a cruel nickname. It is a job description. The spare is valuable until the heir has children. The spare is useful until the succession looks secure. The spare is visible enough to be used, famous enough to be exposed, but never central enough to be fully protected by the same logic. That is the emotional trap of Harry's life. He was born into the palace, but not into the same destiny. He was close enough to the crown to lose a normal life, but not close enough to inherit the crown's full protection forever. And that is why this story cannot be understood only as a private argument between brothers. Because yes, families fight, brothers fall out, people say terrible things, people write books, people give interviews, people hurt each other. But most families do not have a billion-pound hereditary estate sitting between the brothers like a wall. Most families do not decide one child will inherit the machine and the other child will have to negotiate with it. That is where the money comes in. The Duchy of Cornwall is often described in very polished language. Estate, stewardship, sustainability, long-term value, communities, land management, financial resilience. And some of that may be true. It is not simply a personal bank account that William can empty whenever he wants. He does not just sell off the duchy's capital like private property and walk away. But that technical correction does not weaken the argument. It strengthens it. Because the point is not that William has a normal billionaire's wallet. The point is that William has something more powerful than that. He has a hereditary financial system designed to support the heir. He has an estate that exists because monarchy exists. He has annual income connected to his position. He has the legitimacy of an institution that can describe inherited wealth as duty, inherited land as service, and inherited status as sacrifice. That is a level of privilege most people cannot even imagine, and it did not arrive because William made better choices than Harry. It arrived because William was born first. That is the thing people do not like saying out loud. If you enjoy royal content that goes deeper than the usual shouting and palace gossip, stay with me, because this is exactly where the story gets uncomfortable. William's position is often presented as discipline. He stayed. He did his duty. He kept quiet. He protected the monarchy. And there is truth in that. William has lived under pressure most of us will never understand. He has had his life planned for him since childhood. He cannot simply disappear and become a private person without shaking the entire British state. But duty is not the opposite of privilege. Sometimes duty is the language privilege uses to make itself sound noble. William's life is restricted, yes. But those restrictions come with castles, protection, status, automatic income, national symbolism, and the presumption that his future matters to the country. Harry's restrictions were different. He had the exposure without the same final purpose. He had the cameras without the crown. He had the trauma without the throne. He had the public appetite, the tabloid obsession, the royal expectations, the military service, the charity work, the staged family unity, the smiling balcony appearances. But when he stepped back, the institution did not say, "You are still Diana's son. You are still the king's son. You are still a high-profile target. Your wife and children still need consistent protection." The system said, in effect, your status has changed, and once your status changes, everything changes. That is why the security issue is not some side detail, it is the heart of the story. But before we get there, you have to understand what William inherited, because only then does Harry's loss make sense. William did not simply inherit a bigger bedroom, a better title, or more ceremonial importance. He inherited a whole architecture of support. The Duchy of Cornwall passed to him when Queen Elizabeth died and Charles became king. That transition was automatic. One reign ends, another begins, and the financial structure moves with the line of succession. No job interview, no public vote. No moment where William had to prove he deserved it more than anyone else. The system already knew the answer. He was the heir. That was enough. And every year, the duchy produces a distributable surplus. We are talking about tens of millions of pounds. In the most recent reporting, the figure was over £20 million. This money supports William's private, official, and charitable activities. It supports the life of the Prince of Wales and his family. It gives him an independent financial foundation inside the monarchy. Again, not a normal salary, not a simple paycheck, not a private startup, something older, stranger, and more powerful. a hereditary estate attached to destiny. Now compare that with Harry's post-royal life. The public hears Netflix deal and thinks luxury. They hear book deal and think revenge. They hear podcast and think celebrity. They hear California and think sunshine, mansions, and whining. But what they often do not hear is the bill underneath it. Security, legal costs, staff, travel. A life lived under global attention without the same state-backed structure that once surrounded him. Harry did not leave the royal system and become invisible. That is the contradiction people refuse to face. The palace could reduce his role. The government could change his protection. The press could call him irrelevant. Commentators could say he wanted privacy and should disappear. But the danger did not disappear. The name did not disappear. The target did not disappear. The cameras did not disappear. His mother's story did not disappear. And when your public profile remains royal, but your official protection no longer matches that profile, you are trapped in a very expensive kind of freedom. That is the part his critics usually skip. They say, he wanted out. Fine, he did want out of being a working royal. But wanting out of an institution does not mean wanting your family exposed. It does not mean your children become less vulnerable. It does not mean every threat magically becomes private because the palace changed your category. And it definitely does not mean that the only brother who matters is the one who stayed useful to the crown. This is where the split between William and Harry becomes bigger than personality. William represents continuity. Harry represents the cost of leaving. William is the son who stayed inside the contract and received the protection of the contract. Harry is the son who broke the contract and discovered that outside the palace walls, even being a prince does not guarantee the system will treat you like family. And that is a much more interesting story than two brothers are angry. Because anger is easy. Systems are harder. It is easy to say Harry is jealous. It is easy to say William is trapped. It is easy to say Meghan changed everything, or the press made everything worse, or Charles failed as a father, or Diana's death left wounds nobody ever healed. All of those things may be part of the story. But the deeper question is this. What kind of family can only function when everyone accepts their assigned rank? What kind of brotherhood survives when one brother is the future king, and the other is useful only as long as he accepts being second? What kind of love is possible inside a system that measures people by proximity to the throne? Because once Harry stopped playing the spare properly, the whole arrangement became unstable. He was not supposed to narrate his own life. He was not supposed to explain the machinery. He was not supposed to say, out loud, that the palace briefed, protected, sacrificed, prioritized, and calculated. Most importantly, he was not supposed to behave as if his wife and children mattered as much as the institution. That is where the anger around Harry really begins. Not because he made money, not because he moved to America, not even because he criticized his family, but because he challenged the central rule of monarchy. The institution comes first. William's life still obeys that rule. Harry's life is now built around rejecting it. And the money shows us who the system rewards. William receives the estate, the role, the public funding around official duties, the security, the ceremonial power, the soft lighting of duty. Harry receives the argument that if he wanted protection, he should not have left. If he wanted support, he should not have spoken. If he wanted family, he should have stayed quiet. That is why the usual commentary feels so shallow. Harry wanted money. No. Harry needed income after the institution cut him loose. Harry wanted attention. No. Harry already had attention. He was born inside attention. What he wanted was control over a life that had always been narrated by other people. Harry abandoned duty. Maybe. But what do we call a duty that requires a person to accept permanent second-class status inside his own family? And if you think that question is too sympathetic to Harry, hold on, because the strongest argument is not that Harry is perfect. He is not. He has contradicted himself. He has profited from telling the story. He has made choices that even sympathetic people find messy. Some viewers will never forgive the interviews, the memoir, the accusations, the public airing of private pain. But none of that erases the structure. A flawed person can still be treated unfairly. A rich person can still be denied something meaningful. A prince can still discover that his value was conditional. and a family can still hide a hierarchy behind the language of duty. That is why this story keeps pulling people back in. Not because everybody loves Harry, they do not. Not because everybody hates William, they do not. But because the contrast is too sharp to ignore. One brother has the protection of history, the other brother is fighting for protection in court. And once security becomes the question, the whole story becomes darker. And security is where this story stops being abstract. Because money can be debated, titles can be debated, public roles can be debated. People can argue all day about whether Harry should have left, whether William had no choice, whether Meghan was treated unfairly, whether the palace was protecting itself, whether the press made everything worse. But security is different. Security is not a ribbon cutting. It is not a balcony appearance. It is not a royal allowance that can be dressed up as tradition. Security is the line between public life and real danger. And for Harry, that line became the clearest sign that he was no longer inside the circle. In Britain, royal protection is not simply something you buy like a private service. It is connected to threat assessments, public role, state decisions, and status. Harry can pay for private security in other places. He can hire people. He can spend his own money. But private security is not the same as official police protection in the United Kingdom, with access to intelligence, coordination, and the kind of armed response that only the state can provide. That is why his legal fight mattered. It was never just about whether a rich man wanted someone else to pay his bills. That is the cheap version of the story. The real question was, does the system still recognize Harry as someone who needs royal-level protection when he is in the country where he was born? And the answer he received was devastating. Not in emotional language, not in some dramatic palace statement, but through process, committees, courts, decisions, categories. That is how institutions speak when they want to sound neutral. They do not say, "You matter less now." They say, "Your circumstances have changed." They do not say, "You are outside the family now." They say, "Protection will be considered on a case-by-case basis." They do not say, "The heir is protected because the heir is the future, and you are not." They say, "This is a matter for the relevant authorities." And maybe, legally, that language makes sense. Maybe the officials involved believed they followed the correct procedure. Maybe they looked at the rules, the risks, the role, the public interest, the cost, and made a decision they thought was defensible. This is not about pretending security decisions are simple, but emotionally, symbolically, publicly, the message was impossible to miss. William is protected because William represents continuity. Harry has to argue because Harry represents disruption. That is the split. And it is so much bigger than brotherly resentment. Think about what security means inside the royal world. It means the country has decided your safety is part of the public order. It means your movements matter enough to be planned around. It means your family is not just private family, but part of a protected national structure. For William, that protection is assumed. For Harry, it became conditional. And conditional belonging is not belonging. That is why his critics often sound so angry when this subject comes up. They do not just say, "I disagree with Harry's case." They say, "He left, so why should he get anything?" They say, "He wanted freedom, now he can pay for it." They say, "He is not a working royal anymore." They say, "Actions have consequences." And yes, actions do have consequences, but here is the uncomfortable question. Should the consequence of leaving the royal working system be that your children cannot safely visit their grandfather? Should the consequence of speaking publicly be that the danger attached to your name is treated like a private inconvenience? Should the consequence of refusing to be the spare be that your security becomes a debate topic for people on television? Because that is what makes this feel so cold. The public is invited to judge Harry as if he is an ordinary celebrity asking for special treatment. But Harry is not an ordinary celebrity. He did not become famous because he chased fame. He was photographed as a child because of the family he was born into. He walked behind his mother's coffin in front of the world because of the family he was born into. He served in the military while being identified globally as a royal target because of the family he was born into. His wife and children are discussed, attacked, mocked, and threatened because of the name he was born with. So when people say, he chose this, what exactly do they mean? He chose to leave working royal duties. He did not choose to be born into a system that made him globally recognizable before he could even understand what fame was. He did not choose the tabloid economy built around his family. He did not choose the symbolic value that his name still carries. And he did not choose the fact that danger does not politely stop at the palace gate just because the palace decides his role has changed. That is why the comparison with William matters so much. Because William's fame is protected by the same institution that created it. Harry's fame remains, but the protection was reduced. William's public image is supported by silence, tradition, official choreography, and the future crown. Harry's public image is fought out in interviews, lawsuits, headlines, and comment sections. William can appear in public, and the story becomes duty. Harry appears in public, and the story becomes motive. William inherits money, and it is called responsibility. Harry earns money, and it is called exploitation. William protects his family's privacy, and it is called dignity. Harry protects his family's safety, and it is called drama. That double standard is why this video matters. And if you are watching this and thinking, I am not even a Harry fan, but something about this feels wrong, that is the point. You do not have to be a fan. You do not have to agree with every interview. You do not have to defend every choice. You can dislike the memoir, dislike the Netflix series, dislike the way private pain became public content, but you can still see the structure. You can still look at two brothers and recognize that one is cushioned by an ancient institution, while the other is told to stop talking about the cost of leaving it. And if that contrast is what pulled you in, leave a comment with the one part of this story you think people avoid the most, because I think the comments on this one are going to show exactly where people draw the line between family loyalty and institutional power. Now, to understand why security cuts so deep, we have to go back to the moment Harry stopped being useful in the way the monarchy understood. When Harry was the popular prince, the soldier prince, the cheeky younger brother, the one who could stand next to William and make the monarchy look warmer, more human, more modern, the system could use him beautifully. He balanced William. William was the serious future king. Harry was the relatable spare. William was duty. Harry was personality. William was continuity. Harry was energy. Together, they softened the monarchy's image after Diana. They gave the public the story it wanted. Two boys who suffered together, grew up together, and would carry their mother's spirit into the future of the royal family. It was powerful. It was marketable. It was emotionally useful. But that version of Harry had a job. He had to be close enough to William to support him, but never equal to him. He had to be beloved, but not independent. He had to be honest enough to feel authentic, but not honest enough to expose the machine. He had to be wounded enough to generate sympathy, but not wounded enough to blame the institution. And for a while, that arrangement worked. Until it did not. Because when Harry married Meghan, the spare was no longer just a spare. He had his own household, his own family, his own public appeal, his own emotional center, his own version of the future. And suddenly, the question was not only where Harry stood in relation to William, the question was where Harry's family stood in relation to the monarchy. That is when the old hierarchy became impossible to hide. Because the monarchy can tolerate popularity when it serves the crown, it becomes much less comfortable when popularity starts to compete with the crown. And this is where people usually turn the story into Meghan versus the palace, or Meghan versus Catherine, or Meghan changing Harry, or Harry betraying William. But underneath all of that is a simpler institutional problem. Harry wanted his family protected as if they mattered. The system wanted Harry to remember his place. Those two positions could not survive together. If Harry accepted the role of the grateful spare, the story might have continued. He could have stayed in the background, taken the smaller house, accepted less control, smiled through the briefings, and told himself this was duty. He could have let his wife absorb the pressure. He could have let the press define them. He could have waited for the institution to decide when and how his family deserved support. But he did not. He left. And once he left, everything that had been hidden inside royal language became financial, legal, and brutally visible. Who pays? Who protects? Who decides? Who belongs? That is why the money and the security cannot be separated. Because when Harry was inside, the cost of being royal was absorbed by the system. When Harry stepped outside, the cost became personal. And those costs were not small. If your family is globally recognizable, if your children are connected to the British throne, if your wife is one of the most targeted women in the media ecosystem, if your own childhood and your mother's death are part of public memory, then security is not a luxury upgrade. It is the foundation that makes any normal life possible. People say, well, he lives in a mansion. Yes, and a mansion does not solve the problem of traveling through the UK without the official protection he believes his family needs. People say, he has money. Yes, and money cannot buy the exact thing he was asking for from the British state. People say, he is not a working royal. Yes, and threats do not care whether Buckingham Palace has updated your job description. That is why this argument keeps coming back, because every time Harry raises security, his critics hear entitlement, but many other people hear fear. Not theatrical fear. Not branding. Not a man trying to look wounded for sympathy. A father looking at the history of his own family and saying, I know what can happen when protection fails. You cannot separate Harry's security fight from Diana. You just cannot. That does not mean every comparison is legally perfect. It does not mean the situations are identical. It does not mean emotion should replace policy. But for Harry, Diana is not a symbol in a documentary. Diana is his mother. The trauma is not content. It is memory. He was a child when the world watched him grieve. He grew up with the knowledge that his mother died while being chased, hunted, consumed by the same appetite that still feeds on royal women today. So when he says he is worried about his wife and children, it lands differently. It is not abstract. And this is where William and Harry may be living in two completely different emotional realities. William may look at the monarchy and see duty, continuity, the only structure he has ever known, the thing he must preserve because one day it will be his responsibility. Harry may look at the same structure and see a machine that did not save his mother, did not protect his wife, and then told him that his family's safety was no longer guaranteed once he stopped serving the institution. Same childhood, same trauma, different conclusions. That is the tragedy. Because both brothers were shaped by Diana's death, both lost their mother, both had to perform grief in public, both were forced into roles before they had the language to understand them. But William's answer seems to have been, survive by staying inside the structure. Harry's answer was, survive by getting out. And once one brother stays and one brother leaves, the institution cannot treat them the same, because treating them the same would undermine the whole logic of monarchy. The heir must be different. The heir must be special. The heir must be protected. The heir must be above ordinary consequence because the heir is not only a person, he is a constitutional future. The spare, once no longer needed in the same way, becomes more complicated. Too royal to be ordinary. Too independent to be fully protected. Too famous to be private. Too critical to be trusted. That is the impossible place Harry occupies. And it is why the public conversation becomes so nasty. People are not just arguing about Harry. They are arguing about whether anyone is allowed to leave a system like this and still demand care from it. Some people believe the answer is no. If you leave, you leave. If you speak, you lose sympathy. If you criticize the family, you cannot expect the family's protection. And emotionally, many viewers understand that logic. It feels simple. It feels fair. It feels like consequence. But monarchy does not create simple consequences. It creates lifelong exposure. Harry did not become a private citizen the day he stepped back. He became a private citizen with royal visibility, royal trauma, royal enemies, royal headlines, royal symbolism, and royal risk. That is not normal freedom. That is exile with cameras. And the more people mock him for needing money, the more they reveal that they understand the cost perfectly. They just think he deserves it. That is the brutal part. The conversation around Harry's finances is rarely neutral. It often has a tone of punishment. You wanted out, so pay. You wanted Meghan, so pay. You wanted America, so pay. You wanted to talk, so pay. You wanted to stop being the spare, so pay. And he has paid. Financially, legally, emotionally, publicly. He paid by turning his own story into income, which then made people attack him for selling his story. He paid by becoming more public in order to afford the consequences of losing royal support, which then made people say he never wanted privacy. He paid by explaining the system, which then made the system's defenders accuse him of betrayal. It is a trap. Stay silent and the palace version wins. Speak and they call you disloyal. Need money and they call you greedy. Earn money and they call you vulgar. Ask for security and they call you entitled. Pay for security and they say you are rich enough to stop complaining. This is not a normal family argument. This is a power structure protecting itself through public opinion. And William, whether he wants to or not, benefits from that structure. That does not mean William is evil. It does not mean he personally designed the rules. It does not mean his life is easy. It does not mean he has never suffered. But it does mean that when the system has to choose between protecting the future king and accommodating the brother who left, the outcome is already obvious. The heir wins, the spare negotiates, and the public is asked to call that tradition. Now, this is where the visual contrast becomes almost too clean. William at Wimbledon is not just William watching tennis. It is a whole image of belonging. The royal box is order, status, continuity, a protected public stage, the kind of place where royalty appears not as a disruption, but as part of the ritual. William can sit there and look like the country still makes sense. The future king, in a familiar setting, surrounded by ceremony without needing to explain himself. That image reassures people. Harry's image does the opposite. Harry arriving in Britain now often comes with questions. Where is he staying? Will he see his father? Will he see William? How long will he be there? Does he have security? Did the palace know? Was he invited? Was he snubbed? Is this reconciliation? Is this another sign of distance? William's presence stabilizes the royal story. Harry's presence exposes the fracture. And that is why the next contrast matters so much. One brother can appear in public as if the system naturally holds him, while the other has to calculate whether coming home is even safe. Picture those two realities side by side. On one side, there is William in a setting like Wimbledon, where every detail says continuity. The suit, the seats, the handshakes, the smiles, the familiar choreography of royal public life. People stand, cameras follow, officials know where he is supposed to go, and the entire scene is built to make his presence feel natural. Nothing about it needs explaining. No one asks whether William should be there. No one asks whether his security is too much. No one asks whether he has earned the right to be protected. The country simply absorbs him as part of the picture. On the other side, there is Harry, trying to return to the same country with a completely different set of questions around him. Not, what cause is he supporting? Not, what does this visit mean for the monarchy? Not even, can a son see his father in peace? Instead, the questions become tactical. Where can he stay? Who knows the route? How public is the visit? Can Meghan come? Can the children come? What happens if the threat changes? What happens if the tabloids know too much? What happens if the state says this is no longer its responsibility? That is not just inconvenience. That is a completely different experience of being royal. And this is the point people keep missing when they say Harry should simply get over it. Get over what exactly? The fact that his brother inherited a protected future while he inherited a public identity that he cannot take off? The fact that leaving the role did not erase the risk? The fact that the monarchy can still shape his life from a distance, even while telling him he is outside it? This is why the phrase "one family" starts to sound almost absurd. Because yes, biologically, they are one family, but institutionally, they are not equal members of that family. They never were. William is not just a son, he is an heir. Harry is not just a son, he is a former working royal who spoke. Those two labels decide almost everything. And once you understand that, you can see why reconciliation is so difficult. People keep asking, why can they not just sit down and fix it? Why can Charles not bring the boys together? Why can William not forgive Harry? Why can Harry not stop talking? Why can everyone not remember they are family? But how do you repair a family wound when the family is also an institution? How do you apologize honestly when every word might become a briefing? How do you rebuild trust when one brother's future depends on protecting the very system the other brother says harmed him? How do you have a normal brotherly conversation when one brother will become king and the other has built a life around escaping the cost of being the spare? That is the problem. They are not just two men in a room. They are two positions in a hierarchy. And those positions are still speaking even when the brothers are silent. This is why every small public image becomes overloaded. A glance, a seat, a procession, a balcony, a car ride, a funeral, a coronation, a court case, a tennis match, a visit to London. Everything becomes evidence because the family cannot simply speak plainly. So the public reads symbols instead. And the strongest symbol right now is protection. Who is protected without asking? Who has to ask and gets told no? Who is surrounded by the state? Who is told to manage the risk privately? Who gets to bring their children into royal life as future continuity? Who worries that bringing his children back could expose them? That is where the moral discomfort lives. Because this is not really about whether Harry is poor. He is not poor. It is not about pretending he lives some ordinary life. He does not. It is not about turning William into a villain because he inherited what the system gave him. That would be too easy and, frankly, too shallow. The real issue is that the public has been encouraged to treat inherited privilege as dignified when William receives it, and earned income as shameful when Harry needs it. That double standard is the engine of the whole debate. William can benefit from land, titles, institutions, public reverence, and the wealth of the monarchy, and the story is duty. Harry signs commercial deals after being cut off, and the story is greed. William accepts the structure, and he is mature. Harry criticizes the structure, and he is bitter. William protects the monarchy's silence, and he is statesmanlike. Harry breaks that silence, and he is accused of selling out his bloodline. But ask yourself this, if Harry had stayed silent, would the system have looked fairer, or would we simply have known less about it? That is the uncomfortable value of his noise. Even when it is messy, even when it is self-interested, even when it is painful to watch, Harry's story forces the public to see the monarchy not as a fairy tale, but as a hierarchy with winners and losers inside the same family. And that is why this subject produces such strong reactions. For royal traditionalists, Harry's existence outside the system feels like an accusation. For Harry's supporters, William's calm inside the system feels like complicity. For everyone in the middle, the whole thing feels sad, expensive, and strangely revealing. Because the monarchy sells the idea of family as national comfort, the weddings, the babies, the Christmas walks, the balcony moments, the soft-focused documentaries, the carefully released photographs. It all depends on the public believing that behind the titles, there is still a family holding together. But Harry and William make that belief harder. They show that the family is not separate from the institution. The family is one of the institution's tools. And when a person stops serving that tool properly, the warmth disappears very quickly. That is why Harry's security fight lands so powerfully. It reduces all the emotional language to one practical question. Will you protect him or not? Not, do you love him? Not, do you forgive him? Not, do you approve of his wife? Not, do you like his interviews? Will you protect him? And the answer he has received through the official process is not the answer he wanted. That is why the wound remains open. Because for Harry, protection is not just logistics. It is proof of whether the family, the country, and the institution still see him as someone whose safety matters because of who they made him. For William, protection is built into the road ahead. For Harry, protection became something to fight over. That is the split in its cleanest form. One brother inherits certainty, the other brother negotiates survival. And this is where the audience has to decide what story they are actually watching. If you want a simple villain, you can pick one. Plenty of channels already do. They will tell you Harry is greedy, or William is heartless, or Meghan ruined everything, or the palace is evil, or Charles is weak. That kind of story is easy to package. It gives people someone to blame and a reason to stop thinking. But the more interesting story is harder. The more interesting story is that everyone involved is trapped inside a structure that rewards silence, punishes independence, and calls inequality tradition. William benefits from it, even if he did not create it. Harry exposes it, even when his own choices complicate the message. Charles presides over it, even while it damages his relationship with his son. And the public funds, watches, judges, and consumes it, then acts surprised when the people inside it break. That is why the real split is not simply between William and Harry. The real split is between the royal image and the royal reality. The image says brotherhood. The reality says hierarchy. The image says family. The reality says rank. The image says service. The reality says inheritance. The image says unity. The reality says one son is the future king, and the other son is a problem to be managed. And when you look at it that way, Harry's commercial deals start to look less like a random celebrity career and more like the price of being outside the palace with a royal target still on your back. The memoir, the interviews, the streaming deals, all of it can be criticized. Some of it should be. But it also came after a rupture in support. It came after the old arrangement collapsed. It came after Harry realized that leaving the institution did not mean the institution would stop defining the terms of his safety, reputation, and belonging. So yes, he monetized the story. But the monarchy monetizes the story too. It monetizes ceremony. It monetizes continuity. It monetizes land, symbolism, access, tourism, soft power, and public fascination. The difference is that when the palace does it, it looks like tradition. When Harry does it, it looks like betrayal. That is the double standard. And it is exactly why this debate will not go away. Because every time William appears as the stable future of the monarchy, Harry's absence raises the same question. What had to be pushed out to keep that image stable? Every time Harry talks about security, William's protected position becomes part of the comparison. Every time commentators mock Harry for earning money, the Duchy of Cornwall sits in the background like the answer nobody wants to say out loud. One brother inherited a system. The other brother had to invoice his survival. That is not envy. That is not gossip. That is the architecture of the split. And maybe that is why people get so emotional about it. Because under all the titles and money, there is a very human question. What happens when a family tells one child, your place is secure, and tells the other child, your place depends on obedience? Some people accept that kind of hierarchy because it is old. Some people defend it because it is beautiful from the outside. Some people enjoy it because it gives them ceremony, drama, continuity, and a sense of national story. But old does not mean fair. Beautiful does not mean harmless. And family does not mean equal when the family is also a monarchy. So when people say the brothers should simply make peace, maybe they are asking the wrong question. Maybe the question is not whether William and Harry can forgive each other. Maybe the question is whether a future king and a former spare can ever speak as equals inside a system designed to make sure they are not. That is why this split feels permanent, even when there are moments of possible warmth. A phone call, a visit, a birthday message, a funeral, a health scare, a public event where they stand near each other and everyone analyzes the distance between their shoulders. Those moments matter emotionally, but they do not change the structure. William is still the heir. Harry is still outside. William's children are the future of the monarchy. Harry's children are close enough to be royal targets and distant enough to be treated as private complications. William's wealth is framed as duty. Harry's income is framed as greed. William's protection is assumed. Harry's protection is disputed. That is not a misunderstanding. That is the system working exactly as designed. And maybe that is the saddest part. Because if the system were broken, someone could promise to fix it. But what if the system is not broken? What if the system is doing what hereditary monarchy has always done? Protecting the line, elevating the heir, containing the spare, and turning personal pain into public ritual? Then the William and Harry story is not an exception. It is the monarchy revealing itself. So the next time someone says this is just about Harry being jealous of William, remember the numbers, remember the duchy, remember the automatic inheritance, remember the security case, remember the difference between private money and official protection. Remember the royal box image. Remember the father trying to decide whether he can safely bring his children back to the country that made him famous before he ever had a choice. And then ask the real question. If this were only a family feud, why does it look so much like a balance sheet? One brother receives the estate, one brother pays the bills, one brother is protected as the future, one brother fights to be protected as a father. One brother sits inside the royal story. One brother exposes the cost of being written out of it. That is why the split is not really about who is nicer, who is colder, who is more wounded, or who gave the better interview. It is about the brutal arithmetic of monarchy. Birth decides value, rank decides protection, silence decides approval, and leaving decides the bill. So no, this is not just William versus Harry. This is William with the full weight of the institution behind him, and Harry discovering what life costs when that weight moves away. Two sons of one king, two boys who once walked behind the same coffin, two men now standing on opposite sides of the same system, one inside the future, one outside the protection. And that is the real split. If you think this story is bigger than the usual royal gossip, like the video, because that tells me you want more analysis like this, not just another shouting match about who betrayed whom. And tell me in the comments where you draw the line. Should Harry's security be treated as a private problem because he left, or as a royal consequence because the system made him famous in the first place? Because that question is not going away. Not while William inherits the future, not while Harry pays the cost of leaving it, and not while the monarchy keeps asking the public to believe that a family built on rank can still be judged like any other family.